Chapter 12, Peter's First Battle. While the dwarf and the white witch were saying all this, miles away, the beavers and the children were walking hour after hour in what seemed like a delicious dream. Long ago they had left the coast behind them, and by now they'd even stopped saying to one another, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I say, bluebells," or "What was that lovely smell?" or "Just listen to that thrush." They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool green thickets, and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant, and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spell which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with all the witch's schemes. After the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that they didn't hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rests and longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I'd call bitterly tired, only slow, feeling very dreamy and quiet inside as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on her heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right, and that meant a little to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if this had not been on their way, they couldn't help but have kept to the river valley once the thaw began, for with all that melting snow, the river was soon in flood, a wonderful, roaring, thundering, yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss, felt nice under their tired feet, to a place where only tall trees grew very wide apart. The climb, coming at the end of a long day, made them all pant and blow, and just as Lucy was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top. And this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading far as one could see in every direction except right ahead. There, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, "the sea!" The very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great slab of gray stone, supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silk and cords of crimson and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red, rampant lion fluttering in the breeze which was blowing in their faces from the far-off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard the sound of music on their right, and turning in their direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood at the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half-moon. There were tree women there, and well women, dryads and naiads they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments, and it was they who had made the music. There were 4 great centaurs. The horse part of them was like a huge English farm horse, and the man part was like a stern but beautiful giant. There was also a unicorn, and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican, and an eagle, and a great dog, and next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried the crown, and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. But when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane, the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes. And then they found they couldn't look at him, and went all trembly. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, sons of Adam before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver back again. "Susan," whispered Peter, "what about you? Ladies first." "No, you're the oldest," whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last, Peter realized it was up to him. He drew his sword, raised it to the salute, and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourselves together," he advanced to the line and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he-beaver and she-beaver." His voice was deep and rich, and somehow took the fidgets out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand and say nothing. "But where is the fourth?" asked Aslan. "He's tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. And then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think I helped him go wrong." And Aslan said nothing either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Peter, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them, and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off side of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant the whole country below them lay in evening light. Forest and hills and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea. And beyond the sea, the sky, full of clouds which were just turning rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle. And of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows which looked toward Peter in the sunset. But to Peter, it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel of the Four Thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over all the rest." And once more Peter said nothing. For at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It is your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice. So low as to almost be a purr, if not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment, Peter did not understand. Then when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs," he did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running towards him as fast as her short legs would carry her, and her face was white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree, swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first, Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw it looked like a giant dog that was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized it was a wolf. A wolf standing on its hind legs, with front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher, or at least take a better grip. Then he realized she was just going to faint, and if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. But that stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned round, its eyes flaming, its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all this happened too quickly for Peter to think about it all, he had just time to duck down, plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against its forehead, and everything was blood and heat, hair. A moment later, he found that the monster lay dead. And he had drawn his sword out of it. He was straightening his back, rubbing the sweat off his brow and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then after a bit, Susan came down from the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing or crying on both sides. But in Narnia, no one thinks any worse of that for you. "Quick! Quick!" shouted the voice of Aslan. "Centaurs! Eagles! I see another wolf in the thickets, there, behind you. He has just darted away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam." And instantly, with a thunder of hooves and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. "You have forgotten to clean your sword," said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it smeared with the wolf's hair and blood, and he stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. "Hand it to me, and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget, wipe your sword." And that is the end of chapter 12. And now at chapter 12, the children have finally met Aslan. Looking upon his face, it's both more glorious and more weighty than they could barely describe. Just looking at him, they didn't know what to do. But then finally speaking to him and having him look back at them. In some way, somehow, everything was all right. To look into the face of Jesus, what the theologians might call the Beatific Vision, seeing God himself face to face. In essence, it's the final hope of everyone who loves God and wants to know him more. That one day we would wake up in his presence and truly see him and be seen by him face to face. And that kind of makes us feel nervous or worried or excited or all sorts of feelings that might be jumbled up inside. But that is the hope of the Christian, that we will see him and be seen by him. And everything else, all the nervousness and worry, all the anxiety and fear, all of this life would be washed away in that moment of his grace and his glory and his love. So they meet Aslan. Peter wins his spurs through the defeat of the wolf. The girls, at least for now, are safe. And even Edmund who had gone so far and done such wrong, and now even Edmund is to be rescued. I hope they make it in time.